We are live in New Hampshire, in Manchester tonight. Days ahead of the New Hampshire presidential primary, I think everybody expects the news to be all politics all the time right now. But the rest of what's going on in the world refuses to go along with that presumption. Today, for example, we got word that in the midst of hardcore confrontation between Iran and the West, including Iran and us, a U.S. Navy destroyer has directly engaged the Iranians in the Arabian Sea. Now, that sounds very scary until you get to the part about which Iranians they were and what exactly the U.S. Navy did to them. The Iranians in question were fishermen on an Iranian merchant vessel that had been captured by pirates more than a month ago. The Navy destroyer, the USS Kidd, heard a distress signal. They boarded the Iranian ship. They captured the pirates, and they rescued the Iranians. They sent them on their way home. Let's see Ahmadinejad try to turn that into anti-American propaganda. We also got big news today about things unexpectedly getting better here at home. The unemployment rate dropped to its lowest in nearly 3 years today. It's down to 8.5%. The economy added 200,000 jobs last month. Manufacturing jobs are up. We lost manufacturing jobs every year for 12 straight years, but now we have added them for 2 years in a row. Even construction jobs are up. It's the first time we've had a growth in construction jobs in 5 years. Factories are upping production. Consumer confidence is up. Even wages are up a tiny little bit. We talked on this show last night about a few little green shoots in the economy, but today it's like a whole new lawn sprouted up, out of season. The only downside in the jobs numbers right now is the public sector. Private sector is doing much better, thank you, but the public sector, the number of government jobs, is still dropping, as it has throughout the Obama presidency. Seeing the government jobs numbers shrink month after month after month makes it feel a little weird when you see all the Republican candidates for president out on the campaign trail here demanding that Obama stop growing the government.
If you like the way that this enormous expanse of government is going and the power and control that he's trying to wrest from the people, then I'm the great alternative. Well,
given that government is the only category of employment that is persistently dropping during the Obama administration, this critique is a little bit weird. But then, honestly, being here, I feel like it is all a little weird right now in this presidential race. In the midst of all this reporting, for example, of how Mitt Romney is anathema to South Carolina Republicans, that they're all Tea Party Republicans and that the Tea Party hates Mitt Romney, out comes new polling showing Mitt Romney with a huge new lead in South Carolina. The new CNN poll puts Romney at 37% in South Carolina. That's up 17 points from last month. Mr. Romney at 37 now, Santorum at 19, Gingrich at 18, and Ron Paul at 12. Rick Perry tweeted this picture of himself at a shooting range today, saying he was on his way back to South Carolina. He is going to need more than good aim when he gets there. He's only polling at 5% in South Carolina right now. John Huntsman is at 1%. So the common wisdom was that Mitt Romney was supposed to be anathema in South Carolina. That appears to be bullpucky. Here in New Hampshire, Rick Santorum, the common wisdom says, is surging. He's supposed to be surging after his Iowa win this week. That's the common wisdom. Being up here today, I can tell you that Mr. Santorum is attracting crowds, but the crowds do not necessarily seem to like what they are hearing from Mr. Santorum. So this is the Rick Santorum event at the Dublin School in Dublin, New Hampshire that we just drove to, and it's packed, and everybody's telling us that we can't get in. So let's try. I went to this crowded Rick Santorum event at the Dublin School today in southern New Hampshire. It definitely was crowded. I couldn't get past the overflow room, even though I tried. But interestingly, even from the overflow room, I can tell you his speech did not have a single applause line. I did not talk to anyone who was there to see him speak, who supported his candidacy or who liked what they were hearing. The aggressive questioning and criticizing of Mr. Santorum from the students and from the rest of that crowd at that event earned some nasty headlines about yet another crowd confronting Mr. Santorum today. Another Santorum event in nearby Keene, New Hampshire this morning had some of the same reaction. Talking Points memo was there describing shouting and booing at Mr. Santorum from the crowd. They quoted one woman at the event responding to Mr. Santorum expressing some anti-gay views by saying, quote, "This is twisted." Another elderly man saying of Mr. Santorum, "Shame, shame." Both those events were today in New Hampshire. This is what happened to him yesterday in Concord, New Hampshire.
I feel that they're a hazardous thing for society. And so Well, I formed that opinion from my own life experiences and having experienced that. I went to college too. So I would make the argument that states have the rights, but they don't have the right to do anything they want to do. They have the right to do medical marijuana laws, but legally. But I don't think they morally have the right to do things that are harmful to the people in their community, and therefore I think the federal government should step in. Okay? So I'm out of time.
The event that Mr. Santorum was booed at yesterday, some of which you saw there, was a New England college convention that was still going on today. And that's where I went today to try to convince Jon Huntsman to talk with me. We'll have more on that in a moment. It involves a chase scene. But what was interesting is that people at that event in Concord today wanted to make it clear that they were not booing Rick Santorum at that event because of him expressing anti-gay views that they disagreed with. What was explained to me today by people who were at that event yesterday is that they booed Rick Santorum because they thought he was being sort of a jerk to the audience.
It was really his attitude and his treatment of the students.
It was his demeanor, not his stance?
The fact is, it was a 17-year-old high school student that had the courage to stand up, and because he asked the audience to defend their position, and she stood up and did, and then he's berating a 17-year-old girl, not letting her answer the question, switching it around on her, using these really slick political arguments, and the audience reacted very viscerally because he was just berating this girl.
And he tried to bring up the polygamy statement and say that, well, if, a man and a man and a woman can get married, then why can't 3 or 4? And, the girl said, well, that's irrelevant. And then he said, no, it's not, and interrupted her. Yeah. And then he's like, if you can't argue with reason, and what we're dealing with is reason, then we can't have this conversation.
Yeah, so he basically said, if you're not smart enough to talk to me, I'm going to move on.
And here's,
like,
But you guys are saying it wasn't just a confrontation between an anti-gay marriage candidate and a pro-gay marriage crowd.
No, it was not at all.
Reacting to
the way he treated it.
Yeah,
interrupted
and I felt
her.
the booing at the end was really over social welfare. I felt.
Yeah. We couldn't reason. He wanted to use his Socratic method. And well, if we can't possibly argue with reason, then we can't. But you're not being reasonable yourself. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're not letting us answer. So. You don't treat a 17-year-old like that. You should at least have the respect of any individual, no matter who they are, to let them answer. Someone asked him, what he was willing to do if he was in the White House as far as exercising compromise, and he stands up and he says, well, compromise is necessary for any government to run, and absolutely, I'm all for it. And then he says, but I find it hard to compromise with somebody who doesn't have the same values as myself. And I was like, let me get my dictionary out and look up what compromise means.
You only want to compromise with people who already agree with you.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly what he said.
That's the recipe for a happy life.
Right. I mean, really. So
thank you for helping me understand that. Actually, that's great.
Well, just everybody was talking about it. We just were like, that's not how it happened. Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Does it cost you something with the other voters if they see you tangle with a person like that?
I don't know. I think to some extent people admire folks who stick to their principles. But on the other hand, if it becomes very clear that nothing productive is going to come of this exchange and you begin to sound like a bully, there's nothing of value that'll come from that. So why not move on?
One other gentleman I spoke to today described that event, said that the word he used to describe what Rick Santorum was doing at that event was hectoring. Hectoring in a way he described as not only inappropriate for that specific New Hampshire audience, but inappropriate, he said, for New Hampshire voters in general. He said, I don't know, maybe he's playing for South Carolina since there were cameras in the room, but he wasn't playing for New Hampshire. I also had the chance to spend time today with the editor of the Concord Monitor, a major paper here. And as psyched as the common wisdom says Republicans are to go up against President Obama this year, she says her view from here is that people actually aren't that psyched at all right now. Elise, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, absolutely.
So you do this every 4 years. Does your workflow at the paper increase exponentially because this is all happening?
Absolutely. It's dramatic. I mean, we've got regular news to cover.
Yeah.
Regular news about what real people's lives are about when they live here. And then there's all this on top of it. I got to say, for my staff, it's really fun. They're covering school board meetings and they're covering, Jon Huntsman and Newt Gingrich and stuff. So it's pretty heady, particularly for young journalists. It's fun.
When you In terms of the buzz and the amount of work and all the things you have to think about this year compared to other years, is this a more buzzy year or a less buzzy year?
It's absolutely less,
really?
To tell you the truth. Yeah, I mean, 4 years ago, because there was a Democratic race and a Republican race, there was sort of double the excitement, double the interest from readers, you know, because everybody was interested in voting, and now it's probably just, 50 or 60% of the people who buy the paper every day. And I think the candidates were more fun. The stories were more fun. There was people seemed really passionate about the people who were running, and there's much less of that this time around.
So the difference is in part that obviously there's only one party who's who's contesting this, but you're saying also even just among the Republican candidates, people aren't psyched?
I think there were people last time around who would have given their right arm for John McCain if he asked them to. People were really excited about him. People were really excited about Obama. They were really excited about Hillary Clinton. You'd go to parties over Christmas, and this is what people were talking about. It's not really the case. I mean, I think Mitt Romney has an awful lot of support, but you don't see people psyched. The candidates, aside from Romney, they're very different from one another, and the idea that they could pool their resources somehow and come to some, it's a bit far-fetched at this point.
Yeah. It's over before it began.
Yeah.
It does feel like kind of a non-consequential New Hampshire primary this year.
Well,
there's no suspense. I mean, unless Romney doesn't win by 20 points. Like what else would be a relevant outcome?
I heard a guy on television talking about if he wins by merely 20 points, maybe that's 20 points in an election that he just won by 8 votes. I mean, it seems pretty good. It's funny from a journalist standpoint. You sort of think Romney. It seemed like Romney was going to win when we started this thing, a year ago, and we've been covering it all this time, and here we are. It's not that it hasn't been interesting along the way, but in the end, it feels like we're ending right where we started. It's very strange.
It feels like we're ending right where we started. It's strange. It is strange. I mean, the common wisdom is that New Hampshire's race is really important. Common wisdom is that Rick Santorum is surging and people really like him. Common wisdom is that Mitt Romney can't win in South Carolina. The view from here is that all of that common wisdom is bunk. Joining us now is my pal and colleague Chris Matthews, the host of Hardball, which you can catch at 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern here on MSNBC. His latest book is Jack Kennedy, Elusive Hero. Chris, happy New Hampshire.
Thank you. Well, I don't know about that report. That was really something. Well, because it was rich. It had a lot of anthropology in it, not just in the mores fight between Rick Santorum and the rest of the world, but in the mood setting. I mean, that reminded me of the way politics was before it got exciting with Kennedy and that era, the 60s, the 70s. And since then, it reminded me like Denmark politics, like, oh, yeah, I guess we have to vote. That's scary when American politics becomes so routine and lacking in romance and phenomenon. There's no phenomenon to this race. What's the excitement in this race? What's the unique selling point of this election in Massachusetts or New Hampshire up here this year? It's like there's no unique selling point.
That was the strange thing to me about seeing a big crowd and really wanting to go to a Santorum event because everybody was telling me he is getting the crowds, and you could see I was really excited. There's a lot of people here. Yeah. They tell us we can't even get in, and then I get in, and everybody's bummed out, and they're booing him, and they're yelling at him, and nobody's happy to hear what he's saying, and nobody was there as a supporter. I mean, I'm sure it's not true everywhere in the state, but people are not psyched about this race.
I get criticism for saying that back in 2004 I got a thrill up my leg from Obama speaking because he spoke about our country in an exciting way. He didn't talk about himself. He talked about our country and its potential to live up to its ideal of a guy named Barack Hussein Obama from an exotic background, if you will, becoming president of the United States. It is the only country in the world that would actually be like this. And that was exciting. Romney is just the guy whose turn it is. And I hear her, the editor of the paper, the Concord paper, talk about you could have predicted this election in your sleep, that this was going to be Romney for regional reasons. He's the local guy. He gets elected. What else is new? And I think that's pretty sad. But I do think it's interesting, even on the liberal side, the progressive side, Obama has yet to excite the base yet. So we're going to see maybe it's symmetric in the sense that this is a year without excitement. But there will be a crash of views here. It's going to come because Romney has married into the right to get this nomination. He has basically seduced the right by claiming he's a conservative. In fact, a right-winger in many ways, a hawk in many ways. Not that he was what he was all those years up in Massachusetts. And growing up, he wasn't a hawk growing up or a right-winger in any way. Pro-choice, open to gay rights in many ways. And now he's saying, oh, that's not true. So he's trying to erase that and move to the right. I do believe the Obama people, the strategists, and I don't want to be coldly political about this, but they now have him in a boxed canyon. He has gone over to the right. They can just slam slam the door on him. He's there. And I think that's what he's done to himself.
When Romney, we're in this discussion, we are assuming it's going to